The Funeral, a short story by Amy Boucher, read by Owen Staton. "Oh, George, dunna go that way. There's eely a summit to be seed up there on the hills," my sister begged, after I told of my intention to journey to Ratchip the following day. "Dunna pither, Jess," I said. "I ain't scared of old Eric, nor of any of his men." I'd already made up my mind, and considered it final, frightening or not. I would make my journey across the Mind to Ratchip. There I would inquire across the farms, to see if anyone needed a man. "But, George, it ain't just he, it's the devil. Them be his hills. He'll strike you down, George." She was getting worried now, her eyes wide with fear. I sighed. True, I'd have to walk past the Devil's Chair, a rock formation associated with all sorts of ridiculousness, before I reached the hills. But it was a relatively comfortable walk. She'd probably been listening to the older women, for they often told such stories to pass the time away. "Shh, Bess. Old Scratch inna interested in me. I'll pass Hell's Gutter unheeded. So no more of this. I'm going. It's final." I tried to sound as firm as Father once did. She was just a girl, really, and at 12 her head was still filled with fairy stories. Part of the reason for my journey was to save her from being sent away to service. If I could find a means of supporting them, she wouldn't have to leave home. She wasn't ready. She smiled faintly and looked down, perhaps still thinking of my departure. To be honest, I had little time for such tales. I considered them a distraction. People filled their heads with ghosts and fiends, and it left them daft. Besides, I'd walked those ways hundreds of times and never met anything foul, just the odd trader or farmer. I was due to stop with some honest folk in Ratchip who'd known my father until work was found. I wasn't too worried about the prospect. After all, it was harvest soon, and I was strong enough to pull my weight. It hadn't always been that way. When Father was alive, I was a carpenter's apprentice, and he was the man of the house. But now he was gone, and times were hard. Everyone did what they could. Mother even took in extra washing and did odd jobs around the village. Now was my time to show them the sort of man I could be. The night passed with a dreamless sleep, and I woke before dawn, almost feeling rested. The faint sound of birdsong filled my mind as I prepared for the day ahead. I packed my best clothes, not that they were much better than the ones currently on my person, and then ate a small breakfast. Soon enough the time came to say goodbye. Mother had made me promise to write, and I assured her that I would send word of my progress. Bess's face was salt as she hugged me close. "You be good for Mother," I made her promise. "And dunna be worrying about I'm only about 10 miles away for a crow. So if you miss me, save those tears and just flap your wings. I want to be far away." She smiled then, and I bid them goodbye. The morning was a pleasant one, with the spring sun sitting gently in the sky. I even found myself humming a little tune as I walked. As the road started to climb, I noticed how deserted it was. It was never the busiest place. Certainly it was nothing compared to the roads into Shrewsbury, but I'd not seen a soul since starting my walk, though the birds sang happily in the distance. Not man, nor beast, nor devil. I laughed to myself at the thought of old Scratch swanning up to me on the road and trying to claim my mortal soul. Or perhaps Edric, black as pitch in the form of a great dog, tearing me limb from limb. In high spirits, I marvelled at the scenery. It was quiet here. You could feel the age of the place rising up from the hills. I imagined all the people who had walked this way, the countless feet that had walked this way through history. Up on the tops, I stood for a moment and breathed deeply, admiring the view. I felt like David conquering Goliath, or Adam looking out over Eden, proud of his dominion. Not a soul stirred in the moment, and I felt both bigger and smaller than I'd ever felt before. A great green sea crashed around me, scattering gorse, heather, and moss as far as the eye could see. As quickly as that feeling rose, it faded from my chest. I continued my journey for some time, following the road as it twisted and turned across the Mynd. As I entered a small dip in the road, I noticed the air grew colder, and a different kind of silence spread. It was quiet as the grave. I shuddered from the cold, but nevertheless continued onwards. Over the bank, I saw them, a great procession of people. They were funeral-clad and walked slowly. A sombre feeling descended around me. As I drew closer, I saw a great carriage with 4 black horses at the front of this marvel. The carriage itself was ornately carved in fine dark wood. I'd never seen such a thing. It was mesmerizing, and knowing the craft as I did, I knew no man in the county was likely to have created something so beautiful. This must have been a person of great importance. The funeral directors were too, clad in black, with rich silk suits complete with a top hat. Their gaze didn't falter. They just stared onwards to the journey ahead. Upon closer inspection, I peeked through the glass and saw the coffin was drenched in silver, and it too was beautifully made. The procession of mourners were an uncanny lot. I'd never quite seen folk like them round here. Their attire was befitting of a duke or a great lord, and not the sort of thing you'd wear up in the hills. The curious thing was, as they passed me, their pale, gaunt faces held an unknown countenance. I couldn't quite put my finger on it. Their faces seemed to shift and change if I stared at them for too long. They almost didn't seem human. A great curiosity burned into my chest, driving me forward, my feet almost matching their pace. Who were they? Why did they come here? And who lay inside that coffin? I felt breathless, enthused by possibility, whilst they seemed motionless, as if suspended by time. I tried to move past them, more out of curiosity than necessity, but their slow, constant pace made it difficult. I even had to stand aside to let them pass me, and they did without even noticing that I was there. The procession seemed endless, reaching the horizon, becoming a solid, shapeless, formless mass. I continued to follow, compelled to try and understand. I wanted to know who they were and why they were journeying this way. Perhaps some great person had died and had decided Ratchup was where he would spend eternity. Suddenly, a quiet, unnamed terror crept through my body. I couldn't explain why exactly, but I felt as if I wanted to run away from here, run through them, knocking them down as I passed. Their gaunt, expressionless faces became grotesques, mocking me, and their unwavering gaze chilled my bones to their very core. Perhaps the requiem for this unknown figure reminded me of my own mortality, and the isolation of the hills merely amplified it. Memento mori. I'd seen that, carved on the older headstones in the parish. All things must pass. The young grow old if they are lucky, and death is closer than our shadow. It took father so quickly, too quickly, and though I was strong and young, I would soon be food for the festering worms. No, I tried to shake such thoughts from my mind. They had no purpose here. I tried to focus on slowing down the rising and falling of my chest and making my breath purposeful, exact. Perhaps I had been mistaken. Perhaps I was to join these mourners, follow them, and to show my reverence for this seemingly important character. I felt as if God could be encased in that casket. My mind was a tumult, but my feet walked on to Ratchip. The great beasts, those horses, flared their nostrils, wild eyes blazing in the sunlight. They were formidable, that was for sure. If they were unhooked from the carriage, I believe they'd have pounded their way back to the wild hunt. What magnificence! What strange folk, unwilling to speak to me, even though I called to them. They journeyed on, unheeded, and soon enough they were out of sight. It felt as if a dream had taken over me, and as I walked I began to doubt what I'd really seen. I arrived in Ratchip during daylight's dying hours. I was greeted by friendly faces and a warm fire. After exchanging pleasantries and food, I inquired about the funeral, feeling far more comfortable about the events of the day. Perhaps a great landowner had passed, or a lord. I tried to explain, but my words felt coarse, unable to describe the magnificence. My companions informed me quite plainly that no one had died in Ratchip, or anywhere nearby, and there had been no funeral that day. No one had been buried for some time, they said. I frowned, unable to accept the news. When I told them what I'd seen, they smiled and said simply, there's really summit to be seed up there. That night my dreams were of darkness. That phantom carriage rattled through my head. Gone was the slow, sad pace it had taken, and the mourners, oh, the mourners! Their faces were contorted into silent screams.